Your partner isn't angry about the dishes. Your boss isn't evaluating your work. And in 1962, Kennedy wasn't arguing about ships. They were all doing the same thing, controlling the ground the argument stood on. And the person who controlled the ground won before a single word was spoken. Think about the last argument you lost. Not lost because you were wrong. Lost because somehow, without noticing, you ended up defending yourself. That's the tell. The moment you're defending, you're already inside someone else's frame. Here's what actually happened. Your partner didn't say, "You never help around the house." They said, "I've been carrying this alone for weeks." One sentence. And suddenly the argument isn't about dishes. It's about fairness, about being seen, about whether you're a good partner. You walked into a courtroom you didn't know existed, and they were already the judge. This is frame control. The ability to define what a conversation is actually about before the other person realizes a definition has been set. A frame isn't an argument. It's the container the argument lives in. Whoever builds the container controls what fits inside it and what doesn't. Your evidence about the dishes doesn't fit. Your counterexamples about last Tuesday doesn't fit. The moment you engage with their framing, you've confirmed it's the game being played. Watch for it tonight. The person who opens with an emotion rather than a fact is usually setting a frame. "I've been feeling unsupported" is not an accusation you can rebut with evidence. It's a frame, and once you're inside it, every rebuttal just reinforces the walls. Your manager calls you in for a performance review. They open with, "Let's talk about the targets you haven't hit yet, not the ones you have hit, the ones you haven't." Before you've said a word, you're defending. You're inside a frame built entirely around deficit. And here's the thing, the targets you missed might be completely reasonable to explain, but explaining them now, in this frame, sounds like excuses. Because inside a deficit frame, explanation reads as deflection. You didn't walk into a performance review. You walked into a prosecution. The frame was set before you sat down. This is why the most politically skilled professionals in any organization are rarely the ones who work hardest. They're the ones who set the terms before the conversation starts. They email first, framing the agenda. They request the meeting, controlling the purpose. They name the problem, which means they name the solution space. By the time anyone else arrives, the game is already in progress. The frame is already built. The only question is whether you'll notice before you're 3 moves in. Notice who in your workplace always seems to be asking the questions rather than answering them. That's not curiosity. That's frame control in a shirt and tie. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh with a single television advertisement. They didn't say, "Our computer is faster." They didn't say, "Our computer is cheaper." They said, "IBM is Big Brother, and we are the rebellion." One advertisement. And suddenly every competitor wasn't a competitor anymore. They were the establishment, the machine, the oppressor. Apple had reframed the entire industry. The game was no longer hardware specifications. The game was identity. Whose side are you on? You cannot win a hardware debate inside an identity frame. Once Apple built that container, IBM couldn't argue their way out of it. Every rebuttal confirmed the frame. The more IBM defended itself, the more establishment it sounded. This is narrative framing at scale, and every business that dominates a market does it. Red Bull doesn't sell energy drinks. They sell the identity of someone who needs more from life than average people do. Once that frame is built, competitors selling better tasting drinks with more caffeine become irrelevant. Because better caffeine doesn't fit inside a frame about identity. Harley-Davidson doesn't sell motorcycles. They sell rebellion, freedom, the American road. A faster Japanese motorcycle doesn't compete with that because it's not in the same frame. The product isn't the product. The frame around the product is the product. And whoever owns the frame owns the market. October 1962, Cuba, 13 days. Soviet missiles in Cuba. American naval ships closing in. The world 17 minutes from nuclear exchange. Kennedy had a problem. A naval blockade, his military's recommended response, was legally an act of war under international law. If he called it a blockade, Khrushchev had both the legal and moral right to respond militarily. The frame of blockade made conflict almost inevitable. Kennedy changed one word. He called it a quarantine. Same ships, same ocean, same military posture, completely different frame. A quarantine is a public health measure. It implies the other party has introduced something dangerous. It implies a temporary, reasonable, internationally defensible response. It implies Kennedy is the responsible adult, not the aggressor. Khrushchev had prepared a response to a blockade. He had no clean countermove to a quarantine. The legal ground shifted. The moral ground shifted. The frame shifted, and with it, the entire game. Khrushchev backed down. Not because American ships were stronger, because American framing was. This pattern runs through every geopolitical confrontation in modern history. Wars are declared as special military operations. Invasions are framed as liberations. Surveillance is sold as security. Austerity becomes fiscal responsibility. The move is always the same. Name the container before your opponent does. Because whoever names it decides what fits inside and what doesn't. How to detect it. You're inside a frame when you're defending something you didn't choose to defend. When the conversation is about your failures rather than the shared problem, that's a frame. When you're explaining yourself to someone who never asked a genuine question, that's a frame. When winning a point somehow still feels like losing, that's a frame. The container was built before you arrived. How to counter it. Don't argue the content. Name the frame, not aggressively. Precisely. I notice we're talking about what I haven't done. Can we talk about what we're actually trying to solve? One sentence. You've stepped outside the frame. You haven't attacked the other person. You've declined to be prosecuted in a court you didn't agree to enter. The most powerful countermove isn't a better argument inside the frame. It's building a new one. I think we're solving the wrong problem. That's one way to look at it. Here's the frame I'd use. Before we go further, can we agree on what we're actually deciding here? Each of those sentences does the same thing. It refuses the existing container and proposes a new one. And the person who builds the new container controls the new game. Before your next difficult conversation, ask one question first. Whose terms are we on? If the answer is yours, proceed. If the answer is theirs, you're not in a conversation yet. You're in a frame they built, and your first move isn't to argue, it's to notice the walls.